All right, let's have a little chat, shall we? For starters, content warning. We're going to be talking about child endangerment, suicide, bullying, transphobia, a lot of very sensitive topics, and a lot of trauma-inducive topics. So if, these are things that are uncomfortable for you, please step away from this video now. I think there are valuable ways that, you can help with this discussion that are comfortable for you and, whatever your personal traumas are. So just approach with extreme caution, I guess. I'd also like to start by apologizing to Sable Creech. I posted a tweet last night very heavily implying that they were involved in the situation. I had heard from a lot of people that this was the case, and admittedly, based on personal interactions with Sable, I was quick to use past actions to believe that this was something that they would do, which, I don't like when people do that for me, so that wasn't fair of me to do for Sable. For that, I apologize to Sable. I'd also like to commend Alex for making a statement on this subject. I know he didn't feel he could say much, which, fair, but I think it, spoke a lot to hit both his and Makani's integrity that he was willing to say he didn't think that Makani should have been DQ'd. And in that regard, I'd also like to commend Makani for his bravery in talking about this and being so vulnerable with, his emotions and what he was feeling with all of this. I also want to first draw attention to, one very big problem with the way that the discussion about this topic has been framed that I've been seeing, which is, there's been a lot of people being like, oh, this is what happens when you let the pronoun people go too far. And, if that's how you feel, just pause this video right now, go outside and apologize to a tree because they work too fucking hard to make oxygen to have you just, waste it like that. Seriously, contribute something valuable to the discussion. What we're talking about here is Pokemon failing to maintain their, player safety and diversity, equality, and integrity policies. And what you're saying is that this is a problem, that the problem is the policy itself. No, fuck off. You're wrong. We do need to focus blame where it's due, though, and that is TPCI. I think myself and many others were too quick to focus on the judges and the professors who were involved in this, when at the end of the day, they are only allowed to act with so much discretion on their own, and truly they're just arbiters of the rules that Pokemon puts in place. And I think at the end of the day, the decisions they felt that they had to make because of Pokemon's rules for tournaments was what ultimately led to Makani being put in the dangerous situation that he was in. And so I think for that, the blame is just solely to be focused on TPCI. When I talk about the danger of this situation, I think that there are possibly potential legal ramifications here. I want to be clear, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I know any lawyer that's licensed in the state of North Carolina. This isn't legal advice to any parties involved. This is just the tentative amount of legal research I've done into North Carolina's law since this incident happened, which I'm sure is lackluster, because again, I am not a lawyer. But I think that, there's a possibility that there's a lawyer could get involved here. I think Makani could pretty reasonably argue that Pokemon operated in just violation of that DEI policy, and likewise that they falsely claimed that he was protected by it when in practice he was outed and not protected by it, specifically with them trying to, they were trying to preserve that policy, and in doing so they violated his protection by that policy, which is just hypocritical in its own right. And I think at worst, there's the possibility that his parents or he or, his lawyer, whatever, could file a lawsuit on the basis of negligence or child endangerment, because he made clear to event staff that he didn't have a parent with him, that his guardians were people who were participating in the tournament. Pokemon didn't actually even rent out half of the venue hall, so he could have gone and sat in the space that they didn't actually own, because half of that fucking thing was empty, which we all know because that event was garbage anyways. There were so many ways to not put him in the situation that he was put into. And yet he was put into a situation where he told them he didn't have a phone. He told them he needed, to be able to have access to his guardians, and they were like, no, you need to leave the venue, when he was clearly having a mental health crisis, and as he very bravely stated, was literally like considering suicide at that point. Like, the situation was just handled so poorly, and I think that the potential legal ramifications that could come of it are something that Pokemon should be very seriously considering. I will say, I think in general, it's worthy to point out that Play Pokemon's policies kind of give them a bit of protection from us pursuing action against them. I think there have been multiple instances where people have been in positions where they probably could pursue legal action against TPCI for misrepresenting one of their policies, or just a flagrant violation in this case, or even like false advertising in some cases. But I think a lot of the times players and collectors and, just fans choose not to pursue those avenues because Pokemon has made very clear that they're going to ban anybody that tries to lawyer up against them. And, a lot of us just want to keep playing. But then at the same time, in this situation, if this is a case of negligence or child endangerment at like a felony level, this could potentially be a massive, massive settlement, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I think if I'm TPCI, I'd be considering sending Makani a $15,000 check in the mail and the 200 points I robbed him of the chance of winning to just hopefully settle this out of court, which I think Makani would have every right to take them to court. But I also know that Makani loves playing Pokemon and would like to continue to play Pokemon and probably doesn't want to like pursue that avenue. But I think it's worth mentioning that because I think that's kind of a really messed up dynamic that TPCI kind of can avoid accountability in this way, because if you like want to hold them accountable, you have to just stop participating. And I think people really want TPCI to make a statement about this. And I personally don't at this point. I don't think anything that they could say about this situation would justify like all the poor decision making involved in it. And I think at this time, like, it's clear that they monitor the discourse of the community. So I think Pokemon just needs to sit down and just fucking listen to the people who are making them all the money right now, because that's what we are doing for them. Because, in reality, I think one dynamic of like the Pokemon business model that we all fail to consider is it kind of operates like the Marvel dynamic, I guess. We have one of the most powerful IPs in the world on our hands, and in reality, everything's just an advertisement. Even to the casual fan, the tournaments are entertaining. Obviously, like VGC and Pokemon Go a little bit more so than TCG, which is a bit harder to follow, but like we generate ad revenue for them. And at the end of the day, it's the same, when Marvel makes a Marvel movie, it could come out and go out at a loss. It can be a big budget movie and it can lose money because at the end of the day, that money was a drop in the bucket compared to the merchandising and all the other stuff that comes with it. And I think Pokemon's in the same vein. They don't stand to, like, they could operate tournaments at a loss and still make a ton of money by tournaments existing, and I think ultimately they do probably run tournaments at some amount of a loss, but I also think that there's a lot of greed in the way that the tournament structure is run, and I also think that the corporate structure that Pokemon has introduced, making tournament organizers finance tournaments on their own, is also problematic and is something that we need to talk about more. And, I think Pokemon's has really sneakily crafted a safety net where they're not accountable for any of this shit, and that's really messed up. Sorry, I've got a lot of notes here. But that does, when Pokemon's gonna just avoid accountability like they do, like, I think we need to just figure out what our responsibilities as a community moving forward are. And I don't say that to shift, focus or blame off of them, because I think ultimately once we align our priorities within the community, we can come to Pokemon and present a united front and actually possibly influence some real change. But in the short term, obviously, we need to be there for Makani, and I think the community's done a very good job at that. The GoFundMe was great. It raised, I think, $1,600, which doesn't obviously pay back the $5,000 he was robbed the chance of winning, but I think that that's Pokemon's responsibility to pay back to him in any event, and I think it's amazing that the community stepped up. And I think in that regard, one thing that we can learn from this situation is, in the same way that we were all there for Makani, like, let's just be better about being there for each other. I think we're very quick to you go after the drama or the sensationalization of any situation rather than necessarily pursue the truth. And I think that while we've done a lot of good by having community justice within this community and having very open dialogues amongst players about things, I think there have also been a lot of cases where we've been very quick to judge and ultimately have been like wrong about people and their intentions. And in general, I think a good rule of thumb is when you have to assume someone's intentions until you have like undoubtable proof that their intentions can't be good, don't assume that they're bad, because people just make mistakes. Everybody's human, and people can also grow and change over time. I, of all people, should know that better than anybody. If you've played long enough to remember me when I was a kid, I was a piece of shit. But I think a lot of us just feel very similar like frustrations about just like what's been going on ever since COVID ended and well, not ended, but ever since events returned, and, you know, just kind of mishandling of the integrity at tournaments. I think this was the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people, because especially, like, you know, like, Makani got DQ'd for what seems like a terrible, like, no reason, complete bullshit, and then, like, there are people who, like, have been caught cheating at tournaments who, like, are still allowed to play. Like, there are a lot of hypocrisies and double standards in the way that Pokemon arbitrates things, and I think that more attention needs to be drawn to consistency and, you know, things like bias, which would be a good time to segue into a couple excerpts that I have from the Pokemon Professor core values here, because of I think in Makani's situation, the integrity value, there's some really relevant body text here that I think was pretty strictly violated in his case. It says a professor should be fair and unbiased, whether judging a tournament or resolving a dispute. Personal feelings could potentially cloud a judgment call. A professor must not take these feelings into consideration when resolving an issue between players, parents, venue staff, or spectators. Additionally, it goes on to provide that professors are held to a higher standard of conduct than most other Play Pokemon members. And I think that we can all agree that nobody was held to the standard of conduct that they should have been. I also think that when we talk about, you know, the lack of comment, the radio silence from TPCI and judges involved, we got to bring up the professionalism part of the core values, because I think a lot of people, professors included, agree that it's very, very, very bad. The body text that stood out to me was professors should take care to avoid public discussion of rulings or exchanges that could cause embarrassment or emotional distress to parties involved. When discussing rulings in general, care should be taken to ensure that those involved remain anonymous. And I think that, like, that text on its own isn't necessarily problematic, but the way that it's been codified, I think, has allowed judges in some cases to avoid accountability. I think in a situation like this, we should know exactly which judges were involved, and I think that there should be a record of, like, judge calls that were made. I think the clause of anonymity, and I'm not going to try to say that word again. You all know what I meant, but I think that clause applies more so to the players and not embarrassing them, because, again, professors are held to a higher standard of conduct than most other Play Pokemon members. I think they should be held accountable to honesty, which is also a core value of the professor program. And I think that they should be able to, like, speak honestly and freely about these things. And a lot of judges want to, but in practice, judges are reprimanded from discussing, like, these things at all. Like, I've seen, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get anybody into more trouble, but I'm friends with a good number of judges, and a lot of judges came forward and professors came forward to offer perspective on this situation on the condition of remaining anonymous, specifically because, like, in practice, like, they get reprimanded when they comment on these situations and try to give us any clarity. Like, Pokemon staff is like, no, don't do that, and they get in trouble for that stuff. So I think ultimately those core values just need to be reevaluated so that they better align with what they're actually trying to do. Sorry, I've got 4 sheets of paper here. I want to make sure I cover all my thoughts. I think that one really important overall point to be made is that the policy is policy is a very good thing. Everybody deserves to feel safe and included at tournaments. But I think when you weaponize a policy that's meant to protect people, and use it to exclude other people, that just undermines the whole point of the policy and undermines the safety of the people that you're trying to provide it for initially. Because I think that tolerance is less a moral standard than a social contract, and I think that you will receive tolerance if you are tolerant. And I don't think it's necessary. Like, I don't think it's justifiable for people to be like, to like react to the situation and say, oh, well, you know, the pronoun people got out of control. But I do think that TPCI's response to the situation is directly responsible for leading to that discourse, which is, again, bad discourse, not the point. Go pause this video and fucking eat the corn out of my shit or something if you still think that that's like the takeaway from the situation. I think, I don't know. I think we as a community really need to just come together and figure out how we move forward from this. One potential idea that I had in terms of aligning our interests to, you know, present that united front is possibly like starting some form of players council, you know, having representatives from different parts of, you know, Pokemon communities around the world, different, you know, demographics and groups of, you know, marginalized peoples, and just try to get as much representation within the community as possible, because somehow, some way, like, all of these things go back to communication, and we need to build a better line of communication with TPCI, and we need them to hold themselves accountable, because they've done everything in their power to prevent us from holding them accountable without being banned for doing so. So, like, I guess the ball's in your court, TPCI.